If you haven't been with us in the morning, let me just say that today is dedicated to Ecoscenography conversations, led by the fantastic Tania Baer and Marianne Lavoie. So we have them back, continuing the conversation on Ecoscenography, and this time focusing on teaching Ecoscenography. So without further ado, I'm going to pass my mic to our leaders. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thanks so much for being here today. This is our second panel focusing on teaching ecoscenography. My name's Tania Baer and I'm an ecoscenographer and the author of Ecoscenography, an introduction to ecological design for performance.
And my name is Marianne Lavoie. I represent the organization Ecosceno, which is a non-profit based in Montreal, Canada, where we promote ecoscenography through reuse of materials and training of ecoscenography. Today, the panel that we have is will examine how ecoscenography is currently being integrated into theater education across the world. It will include perspectives from both teachers and students who are leading the pedagogical shift. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest for today's panel, starting with Ian Garrett. So Ian, yes, he deserves. Ian is a designer, producer, educator, and researcher in the field of sustainability in arts and culture. He is the director of the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts, associate professor of ecological design for performance at York University, and producer for Toaster Lab, a mixed reality performance collective. Thank you, Ian, for being here. Next, we have Aris Pretelin. Yeah. Aris is a professor at the BA in Dramatic Literature and Theater at the National University of Mexico. She designs, directs, and teaches site-specific ecoscenographic actions looking for ecological restoration, community engagement, and animal rights. She exhibited in World Stage Design 2017, World Stage Design 2022, PQ 2015, PQ 2019, and this year, PQ 23, she is participating in the performance space exhibition at the Mexican Student Pavilion. And lastly, we have a student here with us, nearly graduate, so please welcome Mikko Salminen from Finland. So Mikko is a MA student from Design for the Performing Art Department at Uni Arts Helsinki Theatre Academy. The focus of his scenography studies has been on site-specific performance and international artistic collaboration. In his study program, students are constantly challenging themselves to find more sustainable alternatives to materiality and artistic practices. So thank you all for joining us here today. We will start the session with a small provocation that Tania and I worked on, and followed by that, we'll have a bit of a Q&A with our guest, and lastly, you will be able to ask your question to our guest. So I will jump right in with this little presentation that we prepared. Our idea from Tania and I was to just show how we do ecoscenography training, which is in a different way than our guests are doing today. So hopefully you'll get a global portrayal of different way that we can teach ecoscenography. Oh, right, I have my own remote. Right. So at Ecosceno specifically, this morning I mentioned that we do give ecocenography training. And we do that because we really believe it is a first step for socio-ecological transition. So when we do training, our idea is that it is the seed that we are planting to start rethinking practices. So we do those trainings, and then once the seed is planted, eventually the team, the production team, the creative team can absorb the information, the new knowledge, and become curious to experiment. So the way it works is that we do the courses, and once the team are ready, they come to us to do a consulting, services that we do to work with us, and then be open to try out new material, test different ways of doing. But that demands to have already, an open and curious approach to eco-scenography. And our ultimate goal is that once we've experimented with a company, a theater company, or a school even, so once we've done that a few times, they've integrated so much the concept of eco-scenography that they can bring it much further and beyond where we could have accompanied them to do so, embodying eco-scenography and generating positive impact on long term. So that's the idea of what we do at Ecosceno and why we focus a lot on training. And the second reason why we do a lot of training at Ecosceno is because it comes hand in hand with that consulting service that I just mentioned. So in a certain way, when we work with a theater company and we try new things, it serves as R&D that will nourish the training service, so the courses and the workshop that we give, and those courses open the mind to welcome more innovation and test and vice versa. So it really comes hand in hand. So it came quite naturally for us to do both training and consulting on ecoscenography. And our aim is really to do ecosystemic training, so to reach out to everyone. So we think it's important to talk to students, professionals, and teachers to spread knowledge on ecoscenography. And we've been doing so in different ways, so hopefully that can inspire some of you to work within your own cultural system. But the way we do so is that we talk with professional networks who are welcoming us to train the professionals, so people with a really great career that want to implement some ecoscenography habits to their work, so scenographers, and also in museum exhibitions. So we go to the professional network. We also are working within schools. We're starting next year to work at the National Theatre School of Canada to implement ecoscenography as part of the mandatory courses. So it's going to be part of all the training. And we also train institutions. So that means that we're called by, for instance, a theater, and we train the entire team. So we have a class and we teach to really everyone in that institution. So everyone is on the same page, and ecoscenography is carried by the entire team. I asked my colleague Jasmine Katudal, who is the director of teaching at Ecosceno, what is the core of what we teach? So what is the one thing that we want our students, students and professors and trainers to leave with our classes? And her answer really resonates with what Tanya was saying this morning. And really the core of our learning is to allow serendipity within the creative process. So what we try to do is to teach how to keep the concept open, to create without wanting to control everything, but leaving room for more flexibility, for more ideas, to welcome in pleasant surprise, and to take unexpected paths to go to there. So that's really the core of what our trainings are about. And also, I mentioned it quickly, but it is fundamental for ecoscenography that it is shared by every member of the team. So that's why when we do our trainings, we wanted to appeal as much to the scenographer, TDs, production director, communication. Everyone is concerned by those trainings because it's not something that can be carried only by scenographers. So it's really general trainings for every member of the team because we all have a part to play within this transition, and we have to collaborate together. And this is just a fun example of a workshop we've given in different schools. Actually, in Tanya's class, we've done it, but it's just to show that we can have a lot of fun with doing ecoscenography. So this on your right was a real set that existed. We dismantled it, and then we asked students and professionals, can you please create a new set with these existing materials? And we wanted to see, will this generate constraint and frustration, or will this be fun and sparkle creativity? And the outcomes were great. So in 20, 30 minutes, all students and professionals came up with very different design. It was a lot of fun, and then we realized, okay, so reusable material can actually be a mother of innovation. It doesn't have to be something that's a constraint. So it's kind of part of the work that we do. Next, we'll go to Tanya's work on how she teaches. Thank you.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Marianne. I love that activity because it's all done in SketchUp. So you can actually engage students in rethinking how to, dismantled objects and putting them together to new ways, and do that in a digital way as well as in a hands-on way. So it's a really novel activity. So I actually am situated in an art and design school. I'm not based in a theatre school, even though my background is as a stage designer, and I teach a class for our second years at the Queensland College of Art. Our interior and spatial design students have to do a mandatory subject, which is called Sustainable Environments. It's been in existence for a long time, since before I arrived at the university. And it's a core subject where students are trained to become ecological design thinkers who can integrate sustainability into their conceptual and practical processes. So I just wanted to give a little bit of example of how I teach ecoscenography really briefly. So we do lots of different ways to kind of engage with the concept of sustainable thinking. One way is to take an object, and the students can choose any object. In this case, it was a disposable camera, and they have to track the linear pattern of where this object comes from. How was it manufactured? How was it transported? How was it used? And what happened to it afterwards? And so they have to kind of take a deep dive into a particular object, and it really is amazing what you find out through the investigation. It makes you really think about objects in a new way. And they have to visualize this as well. And then they have to go and look at the same object and rethink it through a circular system. And they have to reimagine that and show the circular processes that are involved in looking at a circular economy. So it's a really good exercise. It's a very kind of research-heavy sort of, mental exercise, I suppose. And then we do something completely different. We get them to go out into nature. So as well as doing that kind of desktop research, it's about going into nature, connecting with our local environment. And here we invite the students to do a First Nations-led deep listening activity that is accessible and available for anyone to use. And we actually get them to create an ephemeral art piece in nature. And it's really a way for them to just connect with their love of nature. In many ways, that's part of the class, is reconnecting with their living world as a source of inspiration. And then from that, they have to create a biophilic design installation that connects them with different materials. So this is a project with a student that was working with exploring mycelium, and they also had to do some prototyping. So they have to come up with a spatial design that you can see here, but they also have to do some prototyping and investigation one-to-one with material. So you can see the kinds of different concepts that students are exploring here, everything from biomaterials to waste materials. And the other thing that is really, really important is we get students to actually think about how the process of making the installation, and so they undergo that through the prototyping, where they have to make a one-to-one example, and they have to investigate, how am I going to put this together in a way that is the most sustainable? And they have to rethink some of those existing materials and glues and all that stuff. And I've had a lot of experimental work where students are exploring different glues and making their own glues that are biodegradable. And then they also have to, and they are marked on this, how they would unmake the design. So that means that after the installation, how are they going to take it apart? What's going to happen to it next? So that's all part of the criteria of the project. And at the core of my teaching, and I think really what my provocation is to everyone here today, is how do we teach sustainability as an eco-creative practice, one that highlights inventive, inspiring and engaging ways of thinking and doing. And I think that's what the focus of this presentation is. It's really about eco-creative practice and nurturing the next generation of performance designers to bring the ecological into their artistic work. So, I think we can start with the panel now, and I think we should be moving on to the next slides. We'll show the work. Yep. Yep.
Right, so behind us you will see the work of Ian, Aris, and Miko in Loop. So hopefully that will give you a bit of an overview to what they're working on. I think that's mine. Oh, no? I don't know. Thank you. So we will start with a general question to you. So starting with our teachers, so Ian and Aris, we would like for you to tell us about how you bring ecoscenography into your teaching work.
So we don't have to negotiate who goes first. Yes. Thinking about it from my own individual practice as things come up, a lot of my work, my background primarily engages with different systems of technology, lighting and video. I come from an architectural background as well. I came up through that training through the devising of like the LEED certification building scheme. So there's an eco-efficiency approach to it, but then also the scenographic conceptual approach to like how we're considering space, our involvement with it, and how those things sort of meet in the middle. So my teaching approach tends to come from both of those angles. Sometimes that's represented in an individual class, but for instance, I'd have a class that's more around a survey of sustainability and different approaches to art making, from certification schemes to arts activism and how those things intersect, and then one that is more in the ecocenographic frame where we're talking about framing. With really the connective tissue between them being about what we're talking about is the value system in which we're creating, whether or not we're coming from that in the way that we're imagining our systems of making, or the way of what we're making, with the core, those sort of being the core questions and areas of resistance that in my own practice that I feel that I run into, is that people are comfortable or not with the way that they make. And whether or not they're open to change that, and then what the end product is, when they end up like putting out there, and how comfortable they are with change with that. So that tends to be the core of the pedagogy.
Thanks. Hola. Buenas tardes. Thanks to Tanya, Marianne for the invitation. I am going to read my answer slowly, because it's not my own language, my mother language. So I prefer to have this written. So, well, I teach 3 subjects in the literature and dramatic program. These subjects are in the design and production area. Fortunately, one of the subjects is for the first years of the bachelor, and I have had the opportunity to integrate bioethical thoughts that I think are really important, with lectures and conversation, especially that can boost an ecological reflection along their career, although their program don't integrate any of this knowledge. I think recycling is the first step, but we can stay in recycling. So I am trying to boost these students with lectures, with conversations and reflections. But my teaching approach to eco-scenography has been in my own project, Tejidos, which I manage outside the university and outside of the institution in a very independent way. This project works with 3 workshops where we go deep into communitary socio-ecological topics that affects different urban green areas, and we apply on-site what I call eco-scenographic actions, where we share knowledge in order to design participatory, restorative, and ephemeral scenographic devices to found communitary strategies to cope with the local environmental damage. So some students arrive to these workshops where they can find a way to integrate the different tools and knowledges we share with their own concerns and knowledge, and they discover a way to apply them to their own communities. understanding scenography in a very expanded and ecological way. So I don't think I am like their institutional eco-scenography teacher. I prefer to see myself more like an older colleague that accompanies their process and always looking for an ecological reflection. Yes.
Thank you, Aris. And Miko, as a soon-to-be graduate student, can you tell us about how sustainability was integrated in your studies at a theatre academy Helsinki?
Yes, so in my recent studies in master's degree, I've taken part in different courses with the topic of environmental thinking, site-specific performance, and special materials. So we approach the theme in the school from philosophical, but also in a practical ways. So, for example, in the special materials course, we created these biodegradable, eco-friendly paints in order to use them in sets. And we tried to find different alternatives to already existing paints. And also within the site-specific performance studies, we really tackled the idea of thinking outside of the black box in terms of finding interesting, usable environments where performances can take place outside of the institutions. So we've, or at least myself, I've gained a lot of new knowledge about having these practical and philosophical tools to go on and further study the eco-friendly and sustainable materials and artistic practices as well.
Wonderful, thank you. So my first question goes to Ian. You've been teaching eco-scenography for over 10 years. What are some of the challenges that you've encountered when you're teaching it?
So many. It's a challenge of a topic to come to because it is ultimately about challenging all the ways that we're used to making, whether or not that's regarding time or output. I think that there is a big shift that we've been seeing across a number of different areas where we now have a student population that are much more articulating not just where, like, what's the type of career that I'm going to have, but how it does align with my values, which has been easing that up for a number of reasons that are there. It's something that's tricky because it fits outside of any one discipline, and we tend to organize ourselves, like our systems of theatrical hierarchy when we're dealing with the professional systems are very disciplinarily based. We oftentimes, when you're expanding on that idea of resistance that you run into with trying to introduce this as a designer, and we heard this in earlier panels today, when you're coming at it as a designer, oftentimes, either from a management or from a technician standpoint, there might be areas of resistance there because you're asking them to change, and vice versa. And so how to align those things while we're trying to work towards the future, but we're working in a present that is based off of the ways that we've worked in the past. And working through those transitions are tricky and take time for them to evolve and actually to see those have an impact. And so, I feel like the students that maybe I was working with 10 years ago are now in these areas of agency where it's happening, where when we're working with current students, there's a sense of urgency that you're sort of working against. We have this the crushing forward march of linear colonized time that is imposed upon our making systems, and we can't escape out of it. Like we live in this system. Becomes something that we end up working against for the investigation, for how it's going to change what the material is. How do I come in relationship to that material, or how do I work with assumptions of it before that I can rely on to get what I want onto stage. So I think the challenges are really about fighting against those conventions, and not really fighting, but feeling the edges of where where one's going to enter the field and that concern, and the amount of time one has to bring this into what they're doing and align with their values, but knowing that they're going to go out into a field that they might not always be supported. And how do you fit that all in to an education?
Great, that's a lot. And it's really, I mean, I think you've articulated that really well about butting up against those old systems and how to, and that notion of transitioning as well from one to another. So Aris, I have a question for you. What does it mean to you to be a good mentor in ecoscenography?
Oof. It's a tough question. Because it's the first time that someone tells me that I'm a mentor, so it's really difficult to answer that. But, well, as I say, well, I see students as younger colleagues, full of knowledge. For me, they are not students, and I am not a teacher, you know. It's just a more friendly and horizontal relationship. The most important thing to me is this confident relationship where we can share our thoughts, and I have to be open to them, to receive from them, and also to give, because they also teach me a lot, and I have to be open for that. I think this is important. I think to fail is another thing that is important, because sometimes teachers present with us with this kind of thing that I'm always right, you know, I have the truth. But I don't think so. I am a person who fails and fails a lot. I mean, I'm always failing. So I think this is important for students to know that failing is not bad, and I am not ashamed of failing. Then I try to listen what they want, and I try to advise them how they can get there, but not in a way like an imposition, in a way that, or not in a way that I want, or the things I will do, just the things they want to do and how they want to do, just advising them. Next, well, I think through dialogue, I try to boost them to find their own path and their own process. It's also important to care about them, about their needs, about their well-being. Of course, it's funny because if I take care of the students, of these colleagues, they take care of me. And it's a team of vulnerability. And I think this relationship is more like a vulnerable relationship, you know, with a lot of affection, I think. So now that I was thinking, what does it mean to be a mentor? I think it's also a responsibility, a lot of responsibility, not only to share a professional process, but to share a personal process and life that you have to nourish and give time. You have to give time to this relationship because you're not just their teacher. You are more like a colleague and a companion, just a person that is behind them, companioned with their own process. So, and another thing that I was thinking is that I really don't choose my students, you know. They came to me and they choose me, and that's another thing that it's, I think, important. They choose me and then they left, and sometimes they return, and you have to be prepared for that too, for that goes and comes and goes and comes. That's what I think.
Beautiful. I think that's really a great, that's not just for teaching ecocenography, but that's just more broadly. But I think that when you are teaching, when you're dealing with ecological and social issues, and you're teaching from the ecological worldview, then those hierarchies start to get dismantled. It's a horizontalization. That's just what working in an ecological way means. Those things get, those systems get disrupted. Great. So I have a question from Mikko. What has been your experience in learning how to bring an ecological perspective to your work at the Theatre Academy Finland as a student?
Well, I think maybe the most important thing that I've learned, and that was already said, that we're sort of sharing and teaching one another. I think I've learned the most from my peers, from my colleague students as well, to have those different viewpoints on topics, on environmental thinking, that has really affected the way I do my art these days. And I think it really has shifted also, or I mean, there is now ongoing demand from the students as well that institutions need to incorporate these themes and really be invested in providing alternative ways and methods and practical tools for students so that they can motivate themselves and further research their artistic practice on these themes. And I think by challenging these structures, we have to also sort of collaborate with different organizations and corporations in order to make the change more widely. So I think it's collaborative work for most part, and I think it's still an ongoing process that needs time, like said, and needs further resources as well. So I hope I'm going to see in the future that this demand from students that we need to find new ways of thinking and doing is met with on an institutional level as well.
Thank you, Mikko. Thank you, all of you, for sharing. Now, if we exit a little bit the institution teaching, I would like to ask you a question, Ian, about the Global Eco-Design Charrette project that you have been leading. So can you tell us a bit about that project, please?
Sure. So with a little bit of background, there's an initiative called the Climate Change Theatre Action, which starting in 2015, consistently as one of the leaders, playwright Chantal Bilodeau, who's been very active and a leader in this field as well, and myself coming into it in the second iteration, or coming out of the first one saying, well, where is design in this? Can we put out a call for designers to get involved with thinking about these plays? Since then, in this biannual cycle, where every odd year, 50 short climate change plays are commissioned by global playwrights, primarily in English, but we're working on a lot of translation right now, to make them available for free so that during at this point, it's pretty much the entire autumn, that they're available for anybody to put together an event, as long as you're using one of these scripts, and then call it a climate change theater action event. We organize them then together as a festival, like putting together a website so you can see where everybody's doing, you can organize it by rate, etc. As we've worked in starting to cultivate beyond just providing those plays, we've been cultivating different ways of bringing design and scenography into that, as using the basis for having ecological content to ask ecological questions within our practices as well. In this last iteration of it, so this is the 2021 plays that would have been displayed, myself, Tanya, our colleague Tessa Rickson, who I think is presenting on the same topic elsewhere right now, as part of the IFTR program, also got together with the idea that we'd like to be collaborating together and then look at doing a bit of knowledge exchange between our institutions, being at 3 different universities and working with 3 different populations of students who are coming from different aspects of technical theater, if not just the fact that we are in very opposite time zones. So we spent a lot of time planning on how to make that functional part of it work. And then we also worked with a external partner, professional organization called Triga Creative, which are 3 scenographers who are also committed to working in this mode, who had, with us in a previous iteration, had worked to put together a global, a design charrette where we brought people together, pre-pandemic, December of 2019. And so with their thought to bring together professionals from around the world, and the fact that we had already sort of figured out this, tracked a little bit of the time zone code of working between universities in Toronto and Brisbane, that we ended up framing a class where our goal was to create a design response, a C concept for each of the plays that came across, so the ideas that were expressed in there in some sort of scenographic response to that, in groups or as individuals, depending on how people could organize around that as well. And working at it, actually for us, working that across terms, starting in our fall term after a break that we had. And in that we had a sequence of guests and workshops talking about different contexts in which to bring the work together. And by the end of that, students went away to our winter break with an idea in place. And then we came back and we just iterated through collective feedback. So those are the practical steps, and in sort of more like what the life of that is, what the cycle of that is. It was really about coming to a place of sharing and understanding one another, coming with a shared value system, and then looking at this content that's coming from a place that we know that we resonate with, and figuring out how to respond to those, and being able to provide effective collaborative feedback between different concepts that we're coming to, and sort of overcoming some of those like that feeling that you can have of isolation as I'm the only person working that way as well. And then that culminated in those C concepts then went into an exhibition in Calgary at the C Space King Edward Space, where all of them were put together as poster presentations and displayed for the length of that event, so that somebody could see all of and students and professionals side by side with all of the content that came out of there.
Thank you. I really like how your students have a lot of freedom to explore ecoscenography, and I think that's also the case of your student, Aris. So you actually, well, can you just describe to us how your student-driven projects are engaging with social-ecological issues and how they have all that, that freedom to pick their projects?
Okay, well, that's another tough question. Well, it's really interesting because, as I said, some of these projects started outside the university, you know, with my independent project. For example, the photos that you saw, the first photos, were works of three students, well, a group of students, but especially three students, that are working with another kind of, I must say, maybe aesthetic, I think. We're exploring another kind of techniques and tools from povera art, from exomatic applications. And for example, Dulce and Cynthia, that are examples that I brought to this panel, are my design students in the university, but then they took part on Tejidos workshops in Mexico in the Sullivan Garden process. So there we go deep into social-ecological issues, and they, this investigation opened them a way to connect with their own issues and their own communitary concerns and their own ecological concerns and knowledge. For example, in the case of Dulce, she connected her work on the Sullivan Park with her town, that it's called Otzolotepec. It's outside Mexico City Center, and She designed a device that, through the memories of her grandfather, her friends, and her family, she investigated the urbanization process that affected Mexico City Center, and now it's expanding and extinguishing the farmlands, damaging the soil and all the food that grown there, especially corn or maize in all its types. So after Tejidos, we started the coordination of the National University Laboratory for the Mexican Student Pavilion in company with Carla Rodriguez, that is an architecture colleague. And for example, Dulce brought to the conversation all this information, and this information connected with other students' concerns. So they started an investigation with their own communities, and they created a device that talks about the sowing of the maize or the corn, and the corn as an important Mexican food, and how to visibilize the elder different knowledge by recovering of sowing objects, storytelling, family inheritance. And for example, they made this beautiful pantone, you know, but it's not a pantone, it's a maizone, or corntone, which is an investigation of color, textures of the farmlands, of all this elder knowledge, you know. So they try to bring to the design process all these materiality and processes of their own communities. And in the case of Cynthia, she started also in Tejidos with looking for watering systems designed in order to have strategies to help trees and plants of dehydration, because in Mexico a lot of gardens and parks are in too bad conditions, so trees are dying of dehydration. So she connected the particular case of Sullivan Park with her community in Xochimilco. She's from Xochimilco, it's another district in Mexico City, where the fight for the water is a really important topic. So she started to work in connecting ahuehuetes, which are an endemic and iconic tree in Mexico, with the ancient San Juan Xochimilco's ahuehuete, who is part of her community and was a tree that Cuauhtémoc, an Aztec emperor, gave as a gift to the Xochimilcas, and this is important, to give thanks for help them in the defense of Tenochtitlan. So this ahuehuete, it's so important because it's the symbolic representation of the defense of the territory. And I think this project is really interesting because she's trying to connect with that ancient knowledge, and and also she's trying to engage with her own community to defend the water that is part of her territory. No? So she's engaging also with ecosomatic applications, ancient rituals, ancient knowledge, in order to connect with this ancient tree without words, in order to connect with its own language, or his own language, we can see in a bioethical way. So I think in conclusion, I think my practice is not about materials only. It's just about understanding our social and ecological problems in the local community and try to apply our tools and our knowledge to help these communities. That's what I think.
Thank you, Iris. It shows that you're a mentor and that you're really proud of your students. Miko, I was wondering, what are the expected opportunities that you are finding as a soon-to-be graduate with a focus on ecoscenography in Finland? So what do you hope to see in the future, and what are the opportunities ahead of you?
Well, I'd like to think that the opportunities are endless in some ways. I'm hoping to work with site-specific performances still and incorporate that knowledge and research into theater institutions as well, and work collaboratively and internationally with different people in order to gain more knowledge of different circumstances and ways of thinking sustainability, because I feel like I might have my own narrow perspective on things, but I feel like in order to work diversely, I still need to contact different peoples and gain that expertise on different things. But the opportunities are somewhat endless, if you will, and you'll search for the opportunities as well. And I'm hoping to see in the future also, I'm eager to see what the current students, what kind of topics they bring and new perspective into this sustainable topic, and how they can teach also new ways of integrating that into my artistic practice as well. So I'm still searching, learning, hoping to integrate these experiences I've faced and showcase the materials that I've used, different alternatives, and hopefully in the future I see some collaborative partners in the audience as well. So we'll see what happens. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So I've got some general questions to everyone. So Ian and Aris, what are the core values you share with your students when you teach eco-scenography? So maybe just a couple of key, maybe 5 key words or values. Ian?
It's tricky to, it's actually really like almost a trick question, because the thing that we're looking for is like, what are we valuing? And why are we building our systems, and why are we making the things that we're making the way that we're making around that? So I think some of the core value, so I can come back to it and say, like, the core values are really I do teach a course called Ecoscenography, and the way that that course works is that students are iteratively developing a project over the course of a term in which we're coming at it through different lenses each time. And so insofar as I could articulate various values, I think those are there insofar as considerations for these are ways to frame the project. So it does start in sort of an assumption of a climate change narrative, like what are things that address an ecological issue that you're concerned with, and sort of like a spatial performance sort of consideration. But then the way that the course works is that once an iteration of a project comes in, we then interrogate it through a number of different lenses of rethinking how one might make that, how one might consider the different aspects of it through that lens. And those include working with community, that includes working with indigenous partnerships and land partnerships, consideration around non-human collaborators that are working in the environment, universal design and access, and how those different components come into it, and then also different forms of technology that extend our sensorium, which is sort of like my own part of it. Like, and the reason that we look at each of those sort of lenses is in the complex sort of the wicked problem of the ecological issues that we're dealing with when we come at it from performance. These are different ways of coming at different solutions. When they get to the end of it, it's not a requirement that all these things are present, but they do shape the way moving forward, that it says, we're going to honor the land, we're going to honor our more than human collaborators, we're going to make this accessible, we're going to make it something that is forward thinking. And those values get built into the design principles with it. I think that beyond that, we're also looking at how do we establish our shared values. It's as much about helping them be able to articulate through the practice that they're choosing and the type of work that they want to do, what they value and what their priorities are. Because those are just some examples. Like, those are things that I want them to consider, but not necessarily like, if you're not working in community engagement, you're not doing anything. So it's almost a trick question. because I think those are very personal things that everybody comes to, and then you're going to prioritize them in different ways. But there are things that, all of those things I think are things that in our conventional ways of doing theatrical training towards many of our existing production models aren't there and end up being inhumane. And so it's about bringing in those considerations of the human and valuing, which, you know, is also going to impact the way that you think about systems, including how you lay out a lighting plot. Like they reflect back into establishing as a human do I value survives in this world.
Great, thank you. Aris. Core values, yeah.
Well, I think the most important thing, I guess, is the bioethical thinking. You know, how are we making relations with other beings? I'm always asking, are you happy with what you're doing? Do you think that helps anyone? Are you thinking about that you are just helping your needs? I mean, for example, there are so many artists that take animals or plants to make their own projects, but that projects only solve their needs. And they don't think about these beings, you know, the plants or the animals. So I'm always in this asking my students, is that okay? Do you know where did it come from? Do you know if this being feels? Are you comfortable with that? So I think this is important, to know that we are not the owners of the life, you know? We don't own the life. We don't deserve more than anyone else, no more than other beings. And we, as an artists, have to be responsible with our communities and with the projects we are making. So I think to start with thinking the project, not only the design, the whole project. What is it about? What does it mean? Is it helping? Is it okay? Ethical questions are so important. We have to think beyond us. And it's important to apply our knowledge in the sake of better relationships between all beings. I think this is the core for me and for my classes.
Thank you. And Miko, what is the most important information that you have retained from the course that you did on ecological sustainability?
Well, I think, like said, there's always the level of responsibility and seeing that your actions affect the world we live in. But I also think one of the most important things I've learned that by experimenting different alternative materials, working on site-specific performances, it's fun, it's exciting, it's thrilling. You get to know more about you, yourself, the environment you're living in, the people, and see the different correlations between our surroundings and yourself. So I would actually argue that even though it's maybe seen with the serious tone of understanding the effects that we do on our environment, and this is sort of the shift that we need to be done anyway, but there's also the fun and experimental part that's often missing in the talk, so I would maybe like to bring that too.
Thank you for saying that Ecoscenography in site-specific is fun, is exciting. That's a note that we had this morning too. It really is a pleasant practice, so thank you for stating that. We have a little 5 minutes before doing a more general Q&A with everyone in the audience, but today we're happy to have some of Tanya's, Ian's, and Aris' students in the room, so no pressure. But if some of you want just to tell us how your experience learning ecoscenography was and share it with the room, that would be great. So I don't want to point finger. I know where some of you are, but I want to see if there's a volunteer. Maybe we can have 1 or 2 intervention. I think, go ahead. And present yourself, please.
Oh, hi, my name is Rian. I was one of the students who took Tanya's and Ian's Ecoscenography class, I think back in 2018, 2 years ago. Going into the course, I never really understood what Ecoscenography was. It was just a chance for me to understand and learn more about Ecoscenography and just learning about working with new materials, especially when coming in, learning about the materials that we use already, like going in, like I sort of have my own understanding of how to make things and how to do things, and then learning how to the chances and the choices to recycle materials, and learning that there is opportunities to create something more by reusing materials is, I guess for me, like I feel like I'm impacting the world a lot better, and I feel like for myself and my own learning, taking the things that I've learned in the course and continuing and furthering that knowledge, I'm sort of I feel I'm helping the world, and like through like climate change and all those other things. I feel myself, I just feel like I'm just trying my best to ensure that what I'm doing has a positive impact on not just myself, but like the world around me. Do you want to go there?
Thank you. Any other of, do you see some of your students? Aris, Tanya, there. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I think, I was one of the authors of the Maison, paired with my partners and my grandpa also. And I think, there's many things that are important about this practice, but I think one of the most interesting ones is that I get to reconnect with my grandparent in his town, right, in his community. And also, I think it's a process of like adding, like a dignifying process, because we realize that most of our relatives that have this unique and ancestral knowledge are migrants, right? Or migrantes, that comes from the countryside to the city, in order to explore new, to reach for a better life quality. And these people are sometimes like being, like shamed because of where they come from, and I think we're like trying to be against that, right? With these eco-ethnographic practices. And I think there's a way to, or these have worked to me as a way to replant, or to resignify this family, countryside, and ancient knowledge. So I invite you to do that, and it's been great to just reconnect with my family through this.
Pues dentro de estas actividades ecoescenográficas,
I think I can. Within those ecocenographic practices,
me han permitido reflexionar sobre cómo mi espacio o el lugar donde yo vivo se ha visto modificado por el proceso de urbanización.
Those practices has made me reflect on how the spaces that I've been working on have been modified. Am I okay? Yeah, you want to add?
have been modified by the urbanization process?
Los relatos de mi abuelo, las memorias que mi abuelo me ha compartido y sobre todo pues las personas que viven en mi comunidad también me han permitido ampliar como la mirada, ¿no? de cómo se está modificando este espacio, y creo que es como importante compartirles una experiencia que me permitió como conectar aún más.
Okay, all the storytelling that she has been recovering during this process with her family and the people that lives in her town helps her to have different points of view, not only her own like an artist, but the points of view of the people that actually live that, and translate it to the present.
Ajá. Justo creo que en las fotografías se veían como las canastas que elaboraron mujeres de mi comunidad. Ellas se dedican como a tejer artesanía con ocoshal, se llama, y es materia que viene de los árboles, ¿no? Y,
for example, the baskets that you see here, they're especially weaved by women of her community with a material that is called ocoshal. And, continue.
Son mujeres que tejen y justamente, ¿no? O sea, ocupan como estos materiales que están ahí, o sea, que son de los árboles, cae el ocoshal, las mujeres se dedican a recolectarlas y comienzan a tejer.
Okay, so this material, ocoshal, comes from the trees, and it fall, and then they recover this material and they knit. So it's material that it's not particularly taken from somewhere or something, but wait until it's there and they use it to create these baskets. And that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ari student. Thank you, Pamela, for the translation. Great. So we'll have one intervention from Angela, your PhD student, and then after we'll go for a more general Q&A. So be prepared for everyone's question. Oh, yeah, Angela. Oh, you don't have a microphone. Sorry.
Hello. Yeah. Oh, hi guys. I'm Angela. I'm actually Tanya's PhD student, so she's my direct supervisor. And I just wanted to say that because she didn't actually teach ecoscenography to me, I actually learned about it through another class that's completely separate from sustainability, which is really interesting. But I think what I've uncovered about ecoscenography is that it's a really, really humbling framework and experience, because like just with the 3Cs framework that Tanya has proposed, it opens your eyes. You recognize what people, communities, and other non-human beings that has been left behind in the process, in the creative process, and we're just going so fast in life that all these things just get forgotten. And I think that's a really, really important point to ecoscenography, because it's about, really understanding what the modern human world could potentially be if we're just a little bit more aware about things. And I thought that's one of my biggest takeaway from ecoscenography. It's just that it really truly opens your eyes. It's a really humbling experience, and and when you teach it to students as well, because I am also under the Arts and Design School, so I teach the first year undergraduates of design students, and I think the way I talk about sustainability through ecoscenography, they actually go, what did they tell me the other day? They were like, oh, they just never seen the world this way, because they just thought that we as humans were like, oh, we just do things, and we're so driven by economics and like capitalism and all that. So it's just taking a step back, slowing down, and truly understanding what's happening in the world. That's all I got to say.
Beautiful, thanks, Angela. Do you want to, now Angela's been leading a project that is a really great example of eco-scenographic placemaking. So if you want to see it in action, do you want to just explain where it is, how people can find it? Just need to give her the microphone.
So the project is called Littoralis South Bend in Situ, and it is actually being exhibited as part of the Uncommon Design project at PQ Studio. It is located at the National Gallery. It's on the first floor, right beside the cafe. We're one of the first exhibition at the front, and what we encourage you guys to do is actually pick up the headphones and listen to the stories that we've created, because it is the stories that we've written and designed for is actually driven by research. It's all driven by research. It has a historical significance to why we picked those 10 non-human characters. So there's no real human characters. The voices are human-driven, of course, but the 10 characters that we've picked are like trees. They're like plants. They're built structures. It makes a commentary about colonization and urban development in the place that we were situated. So it's pretty interesting, so come and have a look.
Thanks, Angela. Great. So I think we're going to just open it up to the floor. We've got about 25 minutes for questions. And yeah, I think it's great to have a bit of time for discussion. And we've got an expert panel here. And also many people in the room that I'm sure have things to contribute. So would anyone like to... Yes, hang on.
Just when you stand up, please state your name, what's your discipline, and where you're from, please. So anyone wants to break the ice? Yep, right here at the front. Mike is coming to you. Just a second.
Hola, yo soy Cintia, vengo de la Ciudad de México, en México. Yo vengo de Xochimilco y hace unos momentos se presentó mi proyecto.
From Mexico City, and a moment ago you watched her project also on the screen.
Sobre la huehuete, y creo que para mí es muy relevante hablar de la ecoscenografía, porque me ha permitido encontrar estrategias para conocer y reconocer mi lugar. Más que construir y diseñar algo estructuralmente, me ha llevado a entender lo que ya está a mi alrededor y descubrirlo.
Okay, and one thing about what ecoscenography had helped her, instead of only constructing a machinery or a design, it helps her to recognize herself and where she comes from.
Crear maneras en que mis sensaciones y mis maneras de reencontrarme con el espacio puedan ser posibles para otras personas.
How my own sensations and my own ways of encounter with the space can be possible to other people too, or to share with other people.
En ese sentido, para mí también es un gusto poder conectar con mi comunidad y rescatar los saberes que hace tiempo pues probablemente estaban perdidos, pero que para nosotros son pues muy vitales. La manera en que estamos relacionándonos con lo natural, con lo no humano.
And also the importance of how she re-encounters with her own community and all the knowledge that has been forgotten. And how can you also communicate in that way with the nature and with the oldest and ancient knowledge of the community? And that's it. I believe that it was a participation, not a question.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have a question for our expert? Annabelle at the front has a question right here. Thank you.
So I would like to know, you speak about reuse materials, but I want to know what you think about reuse element of set of one other authors, and what can we do with the author, and when you have something you can catch for another person, it's not the same, and I would like to know how do you feel with that? Yes. je peux le dire en français parce que vous parlez de réutiliser des matières dans l'idée d'une économie circulaire. Si vous pensez par rapport à un travail existant d'un scénographe, prendre un élément de scénographie, est-ce que pour vous c'est la même chose, c'est comme une matière, ou est-ce qu'il faut aussi tenir compte du travail de l'auteur? Et dans ce cas-là, comment est-ce qu'on fait? Parce qu'en France, c'est une grosse question en ce moment.
La question était pour quelqu'un spécifiquement?
Non, pas pour quelqu'un spécifiquement.
So, I'll rephrase the question, unless you have an answer already, but the idea is since copyright in France specifically is a huge issue, and when we reuse a piece of element, oftentimes it might have copyright or it might be recognizable. So what do you suggest in terms of reusing that material? Is it just a material? Should we highlight the fact that it was before an art piece? So how do we make the circulation happen, taking into account the fact that it comes from another production, for instance?
Right to me. So a couple of things. So true. I'm gonna go back to something that I just like have wanted, sort of want to throw out as like a larger comment too. All the systems that we work in are entirely made up. Every single system we work in is entirely made up. And we can just like change them, so we can change them. Because we can make up something else. Thanks, Mo. Mo's a big fan. We go back to PQ07, yes. Every human system entirely made up. Okay, so why that's relevant here is, so one of the things, and I'm remembering this back to specifically our teaching. So within our department, we have various times where like, we're teaching people to go out into an industry in which there are various tasks that have to be accomplished. They need to come out with a certain set of skills. Those skills have, there's more of them now than there were before. Trying to fit everything into that time that we have with a student to prepare them to be able to do that is constantly a challenge. Now, where that poses a challenge specifically within an ecological approach is that if we don't take a consciously ecological approach to the way that we're producing, a show might still happen. If we don't do other things, it might not. And so in terms of lining up with things like learning goals, anybody who's gone through the administrative process of establishing a program knows what I'm talking about, that there's a challenge there. However, there are still places that you can insert questions at key moments to make sure that you're always tying it back to that. And one of the things that we've found to be very successful is just adding a column to like when we're doing budgets. And that is a where does it go at the end question. And so the reason that I think that that's relevant is that, yes, copyright, if you're starting from a place where you're assuming that there's no future life for that thing and not working within a model of circularity, is a huge issue. If you work from a place with the assumption that it needs to go someplace, there are different ways to assign the rights to it. You can say that I'm releasing the rights to this, so this element can be reused. It can be reconstructed or thought about and designed in a way that can break down into component parts in which you don't run into the issue, so you avoid the issue entirely. I mean, these are the basic steps of safety for anybody who does safety training. This is like mitigating the issue, administrative solutions, etc. So as you go through these various issues, like how can you make it so copyright doesn't become an issue? You can make it so that you can break it down into the component parts where it's not. If you're not able to do that, you can make it so that you release the rights, you put it under Creative Commons. If you want attribution, or you can put it into the public domain, like you can ask your designers to do that. You can have trade-offs to do that as well. That can work itself into to writers. However you want to administratively handle that, there's ways of doing that. And even if you're just asking that core question at the very beginning of what happens of it at the end, you're working under the assumption that it's going to go someplace. So part of it is just releasing the core that core assumption that whatever you're making is so special in the world that you need to make it in such a way that that thing has to be destroyed. And so if that is not your value, if you're not okay with that when you answer that question, when you're like, this is how much it's going to cost and this is where it's going to go, and you're like, I don't want it to just go into the landfill, make another choice. Use a different system. Because that like assumption that you have to make it so it's unique and entirely wholly on its own, to the extent at which copyright will become an issue, is just like this system that you've decided to work in a different system.
Thank you for this answer, and thank you for the question. It's a fundamental topic with the work that we do, so thank you both. Another question in the audience?
Fee Russell, theatre designer, and I also teach costume at Arts University, Plymouth. How, as you two both work within university context, you three do, and something that I'm struggling against, and I'm quite new to teaching, is the amount of creation and production solely for the purpose of examination. And how have you guys managed to counteract that? Or have you? Or is that something you're still struggling with?
I do have an answer to it.
No, I think that's a fair question. And one of the things that, you know, Mariam was talking about before is, you know, that we actually do need to question how much we produce. I would say less is more as well. I think that if you are producing, then you have to consider the making and the unmaking, and so that the resources that you make to create your ephemeral art piece then can get dismantled and used for another student to do theirs. So I think, yeah, absolutely. I think you have to interrogate the mass consumption. And if you're going, if there is assessment involved, how are you going to create the assessment so that it is done sustainably? And there are ways to do that. But I think it goes also back to your question about, or the question about IP. For me, I still think IP is working through a scarcity lens and a kind of egocentric lens, which is really problematic. And we just have to break that down. And I'm all for acknowledgement. I would, you know, for me it's really important if I'm borrowing something, I'm really happily acknowledge that, or I'm happy to be acknowledged. But holding on to this design after it's had its life and had its celebration, to me that's just, like, to me that doesn't, you know, it just goes against everything that we're talking about today about sharing cultures, working with place, working with community. It's just a really egocentric approach, and it's just not going the way we're going to be able to go into the future. So if we can build, we can work with systems, new systems that allow us to co-create and also distribute and allow others to co-create, then we can still, you know, we can still have that artistic process. But yeah, the IP stuff for me is always something that really gets me kind of irritated. But I understand also, like, I think the other flip side is if, as a freelance designer, who's often overworked and underpaid, right? You know, you have that's a real sore point. That if really someone else were to take your set completely as well and not really dismantle it, and you're not compensated for that, I can see that from an economic lens. So that's something that I am aware of, and so that's kind of a tension in the whole thing. But we just can't work in that way anymore. Yeah. Anyone else?
Can I add to that? 1 second, Sylvie. I just want to add to that a little bit, because, and this is, everyone's going to be like, isn't this the guy that just had to blow everything up? I'm going to put on my CSPA hat, which is like not-for-profit consulting. We work with Ecoscenography a lot insofar as coming up with footprinting. And some folks from from many places who are interested in this topic are likely aware of Julie's Bicycle, may be aware of their Creative Green tools. We as an organization host the Canadian version of them as well. And the conversation we have around them is that they're really a decision-making tool. Like, you can come up with like what your actual footprint is. You can be as precise as you want. You're gonna drive yourself a little crazy trying to get to every little fastener that you have and its ultimate impact. Ultimately, there's only one thing that actually, I'll back up one step. We've done a lot of research in where are the areas of impact, and the first thing, the first thing that we've seen is that actually a lot of the arts, especially theater, especially when we congregate people like this together, have very positive metrics in the world of sustainable development as negotiated by the UN in terms of environmental, social, et cetera. Getting people together and shared experiences are really great for social dynamics, economic dynamics, and environmental dynamics. So just by there's an argument to be said that just by making theater, you're actually doing something relatively positive in the scheme of things. Now, that doesn't mean like release yourself from doing everything. It means that ultimately, like the lever that you have, or the real impact that you have, is really that connection of how the arts work on society. So it's really about making, like when you're doing all of these, like how do I do the environmental part, it's about making the decisions about how you're going to improve things, because the only consistent thing is making art that engages with your audiences and connecting with them, and then improving your processes to do that so that it's aligning with your values. And once you've done that, everything, this came up earlier today where it's like, and I just wanted to like share this statistic. Global emissions, average intensity for them is 400 grams of the equivalent of CO2 per kilowatt hour generated, okay, global average. In Canada, it ranges from Alberta, mainly oil and gas, fossil fuels, 600 grams per kilowatt hour generated, 50% greater than the average. In Quebec, it's less than 2. We're at 1.8 grams. It's very low. So don't get bent out of shape on electrical use. There's social justice issues tied into that, which there's a whole thing to unpack of how that hydroelectric capacity was created. But like moving to more efficient electrical things isn't gonna move the needle as much as material management, right? For those sort of things. So it all becomes incredibly specific for the instance that you're working in. So it's always specific. All of these tools that you have available to you and all these processes are about making better decisions. You work within a system. We live in a society. I just want everybody to sort of like collectively release yourself from having to solve it right now. Making the art is good. So that's a good first step. And as a collaborator has encouraged me to think there's no reason for any of us to think that it's going to take less time for us to repair the harm done in regards to climate change than it took to get us into this point. So this is a generational problem that we are facing no matter what. And so, like, yes. And so why that's related to the question. I wanted to preface the question is that sometimes, like, at an institution where I previously taught, the TD is like, the students got to learn how to build stuff. Yeah. And I'm like, you're right. And so sometimes you just got to like, not today, on some of the points that you're trying to make. And then try, and it takes a while to like figure out the change for it. But as long as you stay with the trouble, I feel like you get somewhere.
We have time for one quick question, and I see you've been raising your hand, so go ahead. It'll be our final question of the day.
Yes, hello. I'm Silje Kise. I'm a scenographer and costume designer from Norway. I'm also going to be on the next panel. I just want to tap a little bit back into this copyright question, or just comment or pose a question back. You tapped a little bit into it, Tanya, but I just want to flip it around a little bit, because I see your point, Ian and Tanya, about this, the system and the capitalism of it, but also there have been other people talking about earlier today how to make sure that the artists have a sustainable way of living as artists and as freelance designers, and how to shift the money from the materials to the workers. And I'm also thinking about this aspect, and if a designed piece that is like a signature piece, for example, has a value into another production, why isn't that a good way of also valuing the work of the other designer and actually see the copyright issue as a positive thing, a way to make sure that it is sustainable for more designers and that the design will live on and have further lives. And of course, this is an individual question for each project, but I just think from the artistic perspective that the copyright is also to protect the intellectual work from the artists. So it has like two sides. She wants to have a comment?
Can I give an addendum to the question? So I guess an addendum I would add is that the history of art is on like legions of marginalized people surrendering their creative labor for no recognition, or for less recognition than those who were deemed to be quote unquote the real artists by the legions of colonialist history. So while I also appreciate the point and the generosity of what you're making, there's part of me as like someone who has various marginalized positionalities that cringes inwardly, in that I know like how many legions of folks will continue to get the recognition if I surrender mine and my visibility is diminished in some way. So I kind of wanted to agree and tack on to that point of like, if we're thinking about sustainability also from different points of entry into this system, which, yes, absolutely, destroy, remake, unfuck, like, can we be thinking about that sustainability from different positionalities as well?
Okay, 30 seconds. All right. This is a very interesting question. There is a gathering that is being put together by the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva. They were supposed to be in November. It's now going to be in February, of looking at the different systems of intellectual property around live design for performance. That's been happening because this is actually one of those dominant systems that we assume in the ways that we have like within Western making. Because just like, I don't know if is anybody here from Indonesia and familiar with intellectual property law there? Okay, so my understanding there too, okay. It's a very specific question, but it's always possible, is that like Indonesia actually has a bifurcated intellectual property system that deals differently based off of a Dutch colonial system for most like contemporary Western interactions, and then has a separate system for dealing with traditional knowledge because of the way that that's passed down. There is nothing, again, there is nothing that says that like that's the way that it has to work. And there are systems that work in that way. There's a lot of research around the orange economy, which is around building value around creative projects and intellectual property. Our theater systems that are going to gather into convenings like this are going to bias towards Western ways of making, and we have relatively common ways of intellectual property, and so we might just want to look outside of those to also see how we can problematize these things that we're running into that when we problematize the ways that we're making within those systems as well.
So I think next PQ we need a panel on intellectual property. Like
Bring
in performance design,
this meeting
right?
in February.
It's obviously something that's like, whoa, you know, this is a topic that needs some interrogation and discussion, because I think moving forward, it's something we're going to have to grapple with, and the tensions within that are really important to delve into. So I think thanks everybody for that that realization. Thanks everybody. We need to conclude today. Have half an hour break before we go into Ecoscenographic Futures, which is our last panel for the day, looking at future thinking for our field. Thanks everybody on the panel. We'll talk about next time, and all their contributions.